I'm Scott Lucas. This is today's EA Worldview on Iran. Hope or pessimism over the nuclear talks. Last week, after 3 days of discussions in Vienna, Iran and the 5+1 powers announced that they had a framework for future negotiations over a comprehensive nuclear agreement. But what does that announcement mean for the forthcoming weeks and months? Here's your 3-point guide. 1. It's a difficult process, but it's a process. One of the natural but wrong responses when you have discussions is to expect a quick solution, some type of magical white smoke that comes out in a press conference that proclaims a resolution to a conflict, in this case, over Iran's enrichment of uranium and the sanctions against Tehran. Look, that's not going to happen. This is a process which is trying to resolve more than a decade of conflict. This is a process which until last year appeared to have no hope of an interim deal, let alone a comprehensive agreement. So to expect that the comprehensive agreement would suddenly emerge, which is what a lot of the media implicitly were thinking this week, is flat out wrong. All that was going to be done this week was a discussion of the agenda. For example, should the priority be on reducing the number of centrifuges that Iran has for enriching uranium? Should the priority be on monitoring or even shutting down one of its nuclear facilities? What about the heavy water reactor at Arak that's being constructed and is supposedly a danger because of plutonium? Or should the priority be on the other side? Let's talk about the sanctions that will be lifted on Iran before we talk about the concessions that Tehran will make. The fact is that there has to be a delicate linking, a timing of those steps. Otherwise, one side feels it's being cheated or is giving way in the face of the other. The very fact that Catherine Ashton of the 5+1 powers and Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif could stand up and say, we've agreed an agenda, is an advance in itself. Point 2. Don't believe the negative hype. Just before the talks opened in Vienna, there was something remarkable in the Western press. Almost as a chorus, leading newspapers, Washington Post, New York Times, news agencies like Reuters, broadcasters like CNN proclaimed that the talks were in deep trouble. Why? Because the Supreme Leader of Iran had given a speech in which he expressed pessimism that the negotiations would succeed. He had then talked about the devious and dishonest United States and some of the warlike statements it had made. Look, that's rhetoric. That's grandstanding. The key fact was that the Supreme Leader also said in that speech, I continue to support the negotiations. I support my government. That was the reality that took place, and that was what we saw at the end of the 3 days of discussions. Not a collapse, but a small, significant advance. Which means point 3. Look behind the headlines, look behind the formal talks. One of the most important things that has occurred over the last 3 months, almost unnoticed by the media, is that Iran has been having intense discussions with the International Atomic Energy Agency. These aren't discussions about an agenda or a framework. These are discussions about actual, practical steps which are taking place. For example, inspection of that heavy water reactor complex at Arak that supposedly has provoked so much concern. For example, discussion on a timetable of inspections on Iran's other nuclear facilities. For example, Iran agreeing for the first time to provide information on certain items like explosive detonators to the IAEA to ensure that they are not being used for any type of nuclear bomb. These are the meaningful steps. These are the foundation for a longer-term agreement. And as long as you get those advances that take place away from Vienna, away from Geneva, then indeed we're not talking about a Supreme Leader's speech which is condemning the process, or indeed a U.S. declaration that all military options are on the table, which means we won't have negotiations. No, we are talking about slow, significant, but steady steps to resolving the nuclear crisis. I'm Scott Lucas, and this has been today's EA Worldview on Iran.